Good morning, Jeff, from a still dark California at this hour. I'm sure you are, as I am, getting asked on the eve of this confounding election, what are your final predictions? And what's the outcome going to mean, especially for business? Strikes me before tipping my hand on predictions that safe to say and I guess we say this about every election, it's an unusual election. Charlie Cook made the point the other day, we've never seen so many races within the margin of error so close to election day. Don't know if that is a fact or a result of a volatile electorate and problematic polling, but a lot of races do seem within the margin of error. Once again, a staggering amount of money has been spent here in California, where I am today. $1 billion will be spent on propositions. They're well over 700 million at this point. The two Senate races in Georgia and Pennsylvania together are well over 600 million. It's going to double what was spent 4 years ago and approach a presidential year in spending. Governor candidates in Illinois and Florida have spent over $200 million. Staggering amount of money.
Almost makes me wish I was a media consultant.
Yeah, you and I chose the wrong piece of this business. Other interesting things to me this year, I think there are 26 states with governor and senator both on the ballot. And the question comes is, will one help or hurt the other? Certainly Sununu's margin in New Hampshire has to help Bold up. Kemp, if he beats Abrams by a significant margin in Georgia, has got to help Herschel Walker. And then their third party candidacies. Speaking of that Walker-Warnock race, there is a third party candidate in it. And as close as it is, it could well be 49, 48, 3 only for the third party, but that'll force it into a December 6th runoff. Third party candidates are playing a key role in Oregon and could deliver that state to Republicans. And you've got a third party candidate on the ballot from the right in Kansas that could save a Democratic governor. So third party's more noticeable than usual this year. We can get to the predictions, but what are you generally seeing out there in terms of the forces at work?
Sure. I mean, for us, as we look at the forces, I'm looking more at the content of what people are campaigning on than some of the horse race stuff. But I do definitely agree with your sense that, those places where there's multiple top of ticket that can help address some, drive some of the turnout. Oklahoma is a particularly interesting one because you have not one but two Senate races.
Right.
And I know that's a governor's race that some Republicans were raising the alarm about, or at least the ones that talk to the press anonymously. And when I sort of look at the race, I'm like, well, you've got two Republican Senate candidates turning out vote. I think he'll be fine. And one of the reasons why is, Mark Wayne Mullen is a great example of a trend we're seeing on the right. This cycle, which is a lot of folks running as populists, right? On the Republican side, on the Democratic side, a lot of people running as more full-throated progressives. And we really see those as the twin tides shaping this election. And it's interesting, the polling has moved towards a more traditional fundamentals for midterm election for an out of the White House party in the recent weeks. But for much of the summer and fall, we really saw almost two waves, a wave for both parties happening out there. I think we've started to see that shift as more people pay attention, and the desire among voters to vote for a check on the president has ticked up along with inflation. And so there are a lot of these fundamentals, but you talked about this being an unusual election. I think that's one of the unusual components is all the fundamentals that you would normally look at tell you this should be a significant Republican wave year. And yet you look at the early voting in a lot of states, Democrats are overperforming early voting compared to 2018, 2020, whereas Republicans are underperforming. Of course, Republicans don't. We believe this is America, so you vote on election day as Republicans. So early voting is always not as much on the Republican side, but even compared to where it was in the last couple cycles, it hasn't been. But the thing that I pay attention to most is, even if it is a big Republican wave, is that a good thing for the kinds of folks you and I work for? And that is folks that want to try and build things and move the economy forward. And I think it's going to be a very different landscape, even if Republicans do very well.
No question, it's not the traditional Wall Street, Main Street Republican part of the party. Well, looking at the predictions, I visited with a class of Darius Rigos at USC last night, and I told them things I look at: history, record number of Democratic retirements, is the country going in the right direction, wrong direction, the president's job approval, enthusiasm to vote. The Democrats are in trouble on every single one of those. If you go back to 1990, anytime the president's job approval has been below 50%, the party in power has lost more than 40 seats. And of course, we've got a president sitting at around 42. If we look at our best guess at predictions at this point, the Senate, of course, 35 seats up, as you noted, too, in Oklahoma because of the Inhofe retirement. If we had to call it today, we'd say there's a Republican edge to take the Senate. Certainly it's within the margin of error. But Jeff, as I look at it, if the Republicans can hold North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, if they can hold those 4 Republican seats, then you've still got a 50-50 Senate with the vice president casting the deciding vote. Then every one of the following seats the Republicans can take from the Democrats, it's a Republican majority. Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Washington, New Hampshire, maybe even Colorado. At this point, I'm most confident of the Republicans keeping North Carolina and Wisconsin. I give an edge to Oz in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure about Ohio, but it is a traditionally Republican state. Then if they hold those 4, they pick up the majority. If Herschel Walker can win in Georgia, if Adam Laxalt can win in Nevada, Masters can win in Arizona, if they can take out Patty Murray in Washington, for whom the polls have recently turned bad, or Senator Hassan in New Hampshire, where, as I said, the governor's going to run extremely strong as a Republican. I understand there are even fears in Colorado. The Republicans nominated a very good candidate. If we had to call it today, we'd say a 1 to 3 seat Republican majority in the Senate, and I'd probably put an 80% confidence level on that. Yeah, I realize the silent Democrats could come out in droves and make us all look foolish, but I just don't see it. By the way, long range, and this goes to what it means for business, the 2024 Senate, I don't know if you've looked at yet, but it's 23 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and 8 of those Democrats have not announced for re-election yet. So if the Democrats lose the Senate, they're not going to get it back in 2 years.
Yeah.
On the House, exactly what you said. We're looking for a 25-seat Republican majority. Could be as low as 15, could be as high as 40. But the generic congressional ballot right now is 48 Republican, 45 Dem. Dems are down by 3, and as you well know, to keep the House, the Dems need to go in up about 3 to 5 points on that question because of districting and everything else. So they're really down not 3 points, they're down 6 or 7 points. We see an absolute 90%, 95% chance of a Republican majority in the House that will probably exceed 25 seats. Governors, this is, of course, a big year for governors' constitutional offices. We're going to see the biggest changeover of state legislators in history because of term limiting, retirements, redistricting, a variety of things. But you've got 36 governors up. I'm calling it 2 absolute Democratic pickups in Maryland and Massachusetts. Those the Democrats can go to the bank with. 2 possible GOP pickups out of 3 states, Nevada, Oregon, and Wyoming. And Kansas being Kansas, despite what everybody I talk to tells me about the Democratic governor's strength in Kansas in a 3-way race, you've got to add Kansas to that list. So 2 Democratic pickups, 2 maybe Republican pickups out of 4 states. The partisan count on governors will not change by much. And we're telling clients, borrowing the line you gave us, that it will be a new generation, certainly of Republicans, coming out of elections in which populism has played a huge role. Don't know how you might disagree with those predictions, and more interested in what you think they mean.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we get probably to the same number you're at in the Senate, maybe a little bit different way. I think the 4 Republican defense seats we see slightly different. The only one I have any doubt about defending is Pennsylvania. And I think a lot of the reason why I look at this is, this should be a wave election. In some ways it might be, but as we kind of talked about earlier, there's fundamentals and then there's kind of what's actually happening in reality. And with all of that sort of thought through, I think the tie still goes to the runner in a lot of these cases, and Republicans have the momentum, they have the historic trend line. The real question that we have to answer, and it's hard to know without being in those campaigns, is do the Republicans have the campaign mechanics to turn out the voters they need to turn out in greater numbers than the Democrats do? And how evenly distributed are those mechanics across the campaigns? And that's where Ohio has such a fundamentally strong Republican Party turnout apparatus. They've got a good governor at the top of the ticket. You've just got such a history of turnout. I think JD Vance will be fine, probably despite his best efforts. Ted Budd, I think, is going to easily win North Carolina. Ron Johnson, I think, is in an interesting position where he's usually sort of gotten the benefit of being alongside somebody else strong at the top of the ticket, either a governor or a president. Now he's actually, I think, potentially going to pull the governor, the gubernatorial candidate, potentially along with him. But I think Ron Johnson always runs a few points behind in the polls, and it's a great example of where you have a populist versus a progressive. He's become a real populist in the Senate. His opponent is a real rock-ribbed progressive. I don't know why those other candidates backed out of that primary. He seems like a flawed and untested candidate that has a lot of video that does not help him with any voter outside Madison in Wisconsin. So I've been enjoying watching it from the former, campaign oppo researcher perspective, but I think he'll be fine. Pennsylvania is where I get worried. I think that the Oz has been running a very disappointing campaign from a messaging point of view, and I don't know that there's more. He has the mechanics to really turn that out. Whereas Fetterman, despite being an incredibly flawed candidate for a lot of reasons other than his health, really, he knows how to win a statewide race in Pennsylvania, and the Democratic turnout machine knows what it's doing there. So that's the one I'm worried about. But I do think there are Nevada. I will be very surprised if we don't wake up to Adam Laxalt as the senator. And talking to people I really trust in New Hampshire, and despite still feeling burned by the Ayotte loss, she was a client back when we did more campaign work in 2016. Really thought she was going to be able to pull that out. Everybody I talked to in New Hampshire really feels Bolduc gets elected, and I'm not quite sure Chuck Schumer knew that's what he was spending money on when he made sure that he was going to be the nominee. He may have made, I don't know if he's going to get to brag about that to his donors that they got that win, but everyone can thank Chuck Schumer for taking out Maggie Hassan potentially. Those are the two that I see as most likely. Georgia, I think, we may see Herschel Walker pull across the line, but I actually think this is where you're going to see another sign of this unusual election season. I think you're going to see a lot of ticket splitters, and you're going to see a lot of Kemp Warnock voters that make up the margin. And I'm concerned about whether Republicans can do what they need to do in the runoff election if it goes there. So we haven't proven that we can do that. I think a lot of people are going to be popping champagnes about what's happening elsewhere and not paying enough attention.
That was certainly the case in those two Senate runoffs 2 years ago.
I have the text messages from we haven't won the Senate yet. Yeah. I was like, no, we won. I'm like, no, we didn't.
I think particularly interesting your comment about split tickets. I think those of us who do this for a living are going to have to relearn why people split their ticket and how. One of my colleagues, Sloan Rappaport, originally from Arizona, said the other day, how can anyone vote for Kerry Lake and Senator Kelly? But that's the same kind of split ticket you could have in your example of Georgia with Kemp and Warnock. And whether it's a check and balance, whether voting for one gives me permission to vote for the other, I don't know the psyche of the voter's mind on it, but I think we're going to see a lot of it.
I definitely agree with that. So we land sort of in the same place with probably a 51-49 Senate. It could be 50-50. I'd be really surprised if Democrats actually manage to net seats, and it could be as high as 53. For the governorships, I think if I remember the ones you called correctly, I think we agree. Certainly, Maryland, Massachusetts are lost. And you're going to and in Massachusetts, you're going to get a real progressive elected in the Attorney General, which should be very concerning to a lot of businesses. I don't think she's going to be very mindful about how she approaches a lot of industry sectors and what they mean for the economy. Maryland, I think Wes Moore will be a little bit more of a Larry Hogan of the left. At least that's how he's presenting himself. So that could be interesting. But we do see Republican pickups in Nevada, Oregon, and Wisconsin, and I think that'll be really interesting because in Oregon and Wisconsin, that means that a progressive is going to lose to a more traditional Republican, which is a good thing. However, what's really interesting, you sort of talked about these twin tides and what they mean, and in the Senate races, one of the things I think is important to note is that if you look across the 35 U.S. Senate races, 26 of them feature either or both a populist or progressive candidates running among the major parties. And we expect 19 of those, the progressive or populist, to win 19 of those 26 races. And when you look at, some of those are incumbents, some of them are new, we're going to add 10 new populists and progressives to the United States Senate. So
Wow.
if you were wondering where the Senate was going to be next year, it's going to be 10% more polarized.
I'm not sure that's possible, but you're right.
Yeah. And then among the governor's races, not as many feature populists or progressives, but 16 of the 36 feature either or both a populist and a progressive, and we expect a populist or progressive candidate to win 10 of those 16 races. So they are going to overperform, and I think people are going to take notice. I think next year you're going to see a lot of newly minted Republican senators trying to out Josh Hawley, and a lot of newly minted Republican governors trying to out Ron DeSantis. And I think, especially if Fetterman wins in Pennsylvania, you're going to see a real push from the progressives on the left. We just need to be unabashed and unashamed about this. And certainly on the gubernatorial side, Gavin Newsom is already sort of going down that path. And I think you're going to see that dynamic play out in our national politics going into 2024. On the House races, I think we're fairly aligned with where you are. There's 88 competitive seats. If you look at Cook, some might be 70 something to 90 something, depending on where which rater you look at. But I like where they have the races. Republicans currently hold 26 of those 88. Democrats hold the remainder, which tells you a little bit of why the dynamics are what they are. There's just a lot more for Democrats to lose in these competitive races, a lot of which are open seats or redistricted into less favorable or member versus members. And when it all nets out, we expect the Republicans to take probably net 28 seats, but it could be 25, it could be 35. And that means that, Kevin McCarthy is going to be Speaker of the House with probably somewhere between 235 up to 245, 250 in the House. I would also, which is a little bit lower than you would normally see for the party in a midterm the party out of the presidency in a midterm. But the asterisk I put on that is Republicans picked up 14 seats in 2020 despite the headwinds at the top of the ticket. And I think that was the beginning of this wave. So I almost add those 14 into whatever they do in this cycle.
Well, and that would be consistent with the average 40 plus seat win when the president's approval rating is less than 50. Yeah, if you look at it not as an October wave, but as a 2-year wave, that makes sense.
So the big question you asked is so that's what's going to happen with the horse race, but what does that really mean? And as we look at it, we really see the entire campaign debate being shaped by these populist and progressive forces. And what do we mean by that? We really look at it and define it as skepticism, if not outright hostility, towards business, particularly big business, Fortune listed type companies. Everybody loves mom and pop shops, but when they talk about, you have Democrats, progressives all running on, collusion and profiteering by big oil, big grocery, big dairy, big corporates in general is what's really driving inflation, not any of the spending or any of the other fundamentals of the economy. On the Republican side, you have a populist wave going against woke corporations making ESG commitments, social impact commitments, and otherwise taking what they view as progressive positions on social and cultural issues. You have both parties focused on big tech and social media content manipulation or disinformation and all the rest of that. And you're really seeing that play out in these races in a significant way. and compounding that challenge is just how many new folks you're going to see in these races. As you pointed out, probably 1 in 5 members of Congress is going to be brand new. 1 in 4 state legislators, so 25% of state legislators across the country are going to be brand new. And legislatures overall are going to get more partisan and ideological. 2/3 of state legislative chambers, 68 out of 99 state legislative chambers, are expected to increase the majority party's control in those state legislatures next week, and have majorities over 60%. And there's going to be close to 80% of states are going to have a trifecta control, and there was a great Politico story the other day on this in Massachusetts. The last 8 years, Democrats in the state legislature have had to figure out what can we get Charlie Baker to sign, and it was a moderating influence on legislation. That's out the window. That state's going to go be, it's going to be California of the East Coast, and move forward with a lot of things without any guardrails or brake pedals.
Well, and from the populism wave that swamped Disney, if DeSantis is handily reelected with an overwhelming mandate, still sitting on an immense campaign fund, Florida is going to be similarly out of control, and with new leadership, and of course, the other two imponderable questions I asked Charlie the other night: who will the presidential nominees be? But certainly, that competition and the intricate dances will intensify starting about midnight Tuesday night, and then. How do the Democrats in the House, likely in minority, reorganize themselves? The average age of Speaker Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn is 82. And I'm not sure there's a next generation defined and ready. Now, that's a whole lot less relevant than what the majority party does. But again, they've got to produce legislation that President Biden won't veto for 2 years.
Yeah. Well, the question is how focused are they on legislation, and how much are they focused on oversight and investigation? And I think they're going to be very aggressive on that front. And while you might say, well, they're going to go after Biden, but we're a business, we're companies, we're an industry, what does that impact us? They are going to focus on banks and asset managers and what they're doing with ESG and whether they're colluding with the administration. They're going to go after. They're all hunting for the next Solyndra with all of this green energy spending going out the door from infrastructure bill last year and IRA this summer. They're going to, Rand Paul. If the Senate flips to Republican, Rand Paul is going to be the Help Committee chair. And he's already made very clear that he's going after not just Dr. Fauci, but the entire enterprise of responding to COVID. And there's an entire healthcare sector that's been a part of that effort that's now going to find itself under scrutiny.
You could find not only
big tech, and you just run down the line of industries that are going to be on the crosshairs.
Not only you're talking about healthcare, not only in Congress, but in those trifecta states, particularly the Republican ones. You could see all vaccine mandates, not just COVID, but polio, mumps, everything else. You could see those eliminated. I would think that would be of interest to the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry. Obamacare is going to come under scrutiny, but again, the funding of infrastructure and the forces driving that funding, the green concerns, are going to be right in the middle of those investigative crosshairs.
Yeah. Meanwhile, at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, Biden's going to be signing as many executive orders as he can. And he's already, in his first year, he did more executive actions than any president since Gerald Ford And that was when he had, albeit marginal control of Congress.
Right. Yeah, we've become a government by executive action and court decision, not by legislation.
That's right.
Anything else we should touch on today, or should we just wait and see how foolish you and I will both look on Wednesday morning?
We covered a lot of ground, and I hope we added sufficient caveats to our predictions. I think this is it. You said at the outset, this is a very unusual election, and I remember looking at there were more signals in 2016 that there was this wave coming that you didn't quite understand what it was. And this time, the signals I see is just this energy on both sides, the populism and the progressivism driving people into office. And that tells me, rather than, it's going to be a Republican wave, it's going to be there's really just going to be more of a these twin waves that's going to make red states redder and blue states bluer. And unfortunately, any company that operates in more than one state is going to get stretched even more between those two different policies.
I remember one of the executives in the gaming industry once said to me, we can't defend gaming in one state and attack it in our competition in another. It can't be good in one state and bad in another. We are one industry. And as you say, companies that operate in more than one state, in today's internet world, they can only have one identity, one voice, one message, one position. And if you're operating in Wyoming and Massachusetts, that's going to be a challenge.
Well, that sounds like a happy note to end on.
Terrific.